Greetings, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Today, we're recording this IPO-VID live stream. This is series 35, episode number 2. In the aggregate, that comes to episode number 206, which, of course, as we all remember, was a magnificent Ferrari Dino, particularly the sports prototype version. Well, what can I say about the world of exchanges, ladies and gentlemen, as we come to this exciting juncture towards the end of the first quarter? Well, we could even look back to what was going on in the last quarter with Young's Pyramid. Interesting to see, just about to finish Q1. What was fascinating about Q4 of last year was that we saw a temporary hiatus in the ice age at the top of tier 1 of Young's Pyramid. The Intercontinental Exchange suffering a slight pullback in its share value, while suddenly investors were rushing in, relatively speaking, during what was a market lull at that point in time, to the Chicago Mercantile Exchange Group, CME, allowing CME to take itself back over $100 billion in market capitalization, leading the pyramid at the same point in time as Hong Kong exchanges were looking remarkably strong in third place. Remember, I'm super bullish about HKEX. They retain that incredible power, the offshore financial center for the RMB, Stock Connect, Bond Connect straight into China, the possibility for those flows to come out of China, and possibly most significantly of all, they're building the offshore RMB yield curve. Think euro dollars times a multiple, ladies and gentlemen. That's what's going to be built there. And once they get those short-term derivatives coming in, stir futures, short-term interest rates all the way through to the bonds, I think that's going to be a mega complex for the Hong Kong exchanges. And of course, they're very capably run under the CEO, Bonnie Chan. In tier 2, we've had similarly lots of exciting upheaval. It was interesting to see NASDAQ, however, really strong. NASDAQ on the cusp of being in tier 1 of Young's Pyramid as they lead Deutsche Börse. And in tier 3, amongst the smaller markets of the world, all very technologically vital to, in many ways, more vital to Main Street than perhaps some of the very large, purely functional tier 1 financial exchanges. Leading the way there, obviously, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange and the Warsaw Stock Exchange. Warsaw slightly outpointing at the Johannesburg South African Exchange in the end. Biggest mover of the entire quarter coming into the end of last year. It was ahead of the adoption of the euro. The Bulgarian Stock Exchange seeing its market capitalization doubling during the course of that time. Something we were looking at last month, ladies and gentlemen, just for a little bit of fun, we were, of course, pondering during the course of St. Valentine's Day, what else? Marketplaces. And in this case, it was marketplaces for dating. So we adopted a very brief and one-off special. Young's Pyramid readjusted not just for marketplaces and exchanges, but particularly for dating apps. And how interesting it is to see the way that the Match Group is absolutely dominant on that platform basis. Of course, they have apparently multiple different brands in this area, not that I've ever swiped right or indeed swiped left on any of them. And indeed, other specialist vendors are there throughout Young's Pyramid of dating apps. You could check that out. It was something that we had recently in our Exchange Invest Weekend Edition, which is, of course, a macro read that is free to all. If you want to sign up to that or sign up to the newsletter of Exchanges itself, the business of bourses can be yours in your inbox via exchangeinvest.com. Sign up now for a free 7-day trial. And as that helps to pay the bills, let's also say one thing that Exchange Invest was predicting was prediction markets. And that's certainly something that in the world of exchanges has been a huge thing. At the same time, predicting the post-trade operating models of tomorrow brings us very elegantly to our NASDAQ-sponsored segment. Investor appetite for Asia is rising, but post-trade friction is holding markets back. In this new value exchange and NASDAQ study, 25% of participants plan to grow exposure. 46%, however, face artificial trading limits. The biggest pain point, corporate actions. 60% of recipients report high error rates. 39% of platforms are still legacy. The fix is clear, ladies and gentlemen. Harmonize rules, standardize workflows, modernize technology in order to unlock efficiencies in settlement and corporate actions. For exchange leaders ready to scale, you can download Creating Asia's Post-Trade Operating Model of Tomorrow at the following link, bit.ly APAC-Post-Trade. That's bit.ly, that's B for Bravo, I for India, T for Tango, full stop, L for Lima, Y for Yankee, and then APAC-Post-Trade, APAC, after the Asian trade organization, and Post Trade with 2 T's with a dash in the middle, APAC-Post Trade. Joining us today on IPO-VID, we have a fabulous guest. In many ways, a woman who was a legend during her time in office, Marlene Street Forrest. She's going to offer us some reflections from Jamaica. For over 25 years, Marlene Street Forrest served as first general manager and managing director of the Jamaica Stock Exchange. During her tenure, she was instrumental in historically developing the JSE Group and particularly the exchange itself. Now the managing director of StreetForrest Consultancy Limited, a strategic advisory firm focused on advancing capital markets development, strengthening governance, and building leadership capacities. Marlene will be reflecting during the course of this discussion on her time at JSE and the opportunities within the Jamaican economy. Marlene is the author of the book on leadership, discipline, discretion, and daring, and co-author of Steps to Good Government. Marlene, welcome to the show. It's an absolute joy to have you here. Thank you for fitting us into your busy calendar. It's so good to see you on IPO-VID. I know we're recording because it's difficult to find a time to manage to get you live. It's a joy to have you here. Where in the world are you today, Marlene?
Good morning. I am in Jamaica, Kingston, Jamaica. Sunny day today.
A beautiful sunny day in Kingston, Jamaica. I'm coming to you from not that far away, from Grand Turk in the Turks and Caicos Islands. A beautiful sunny day here as well. Very, very breezy at the moment, I noticed, but nonetheless, another beautiful giving way to spring day in the Caribbean. So tell me, Marlene, tell us a little bit about your life story. I mean, I remember you because you've been at the Jamaica Stock Exchange for a quarter of a century before you retired earlier this year or late last year. But tell us, how did you get into financial markets in the first place?
You know, I'm always asked that question. And the simple thing is that initially I was an accountant for years. And then I saw an ad in the paper for actually joining the stock exchange. And I said, look, let me have a go at this. And I applied. So technically, I was always in finance, you know, because as a financial controller, chief accountant, cost accountant, you know, it is in that realm. But in terms of the heart of the capital market, I only became very involved in it, having started to work at the Jamaica Stock Exchange in 2000.
So you got to the Jamaica Stock Exchange and you immediately went into office. Tell us a little bit about how the Jamaica Stock Exchange looked in 2000 AD.
Okay, well, it was a sleepy exchange. You know, when I went, I was actually a little surprised that it was that sleepy, but it was sleepy. But nonetheless, it had the structure to grow. We had a few listings on the exchange, and it was one market, which was the main market. We call it now the main market of the exchange. Again, probably under 50,000 investors investing in the exchange. And those were more sophisticated investors because the culture at that point was persons believing that it was for the rich man to invest in the exchange. And pretty much we were suffering from more delistings than listing on the exchange. So, you know, it was ripe for growth. And that is what I took from it, that there was a positive because there is the possibility for growth.
Very interesting. So there was a possibility for growth. So tell us, I mean, what were some of the things that you did in order to build around this core listing franchise to develop the exchange?
Well, you know, you cannot solve a problem unless you know what the problem is. So one of the things that we did, we went out to the market and we just got a sense, tried to get a sense as to what is it that prevents, one, on the supply side, persons coming in to list and access equity capital, and two, on the demand side, why persons were not, you know, participating in the market. You have to also understand that at that point in time too, there was the high interest rate regime where it was more favorable for persons to just put their money on the fixed income and get some high rates of return. So that also crippled the market, and the government crowded out the market. So there were some economic factors that would have prevented growth, and there were some cultural factors that would have prevented growth too, because people felt that, you know, the market was not for them. So one of the things that we did is to call the team together. I like to put that in, to say, how are we going to get attention to this market, understanding that underlying is the fact that persons, in order for the economy to grow, in order for businesses to grow, you need what is called patient capital. So the team had to buy in to the fact that this is a platform for the economy. This is a platform for investors to have a long-term investment. And this is a platform for the suppliers, which are the companies, to get equity capital, which is the patient capital. And one of the things that would be fundamental to that is market education. So what we set out to do is determine that both the investors need to understand what the market allows, the advantages, even the disadvantages. So, you know, what are some of the opportunities? And then we started to work with people, because the fact is that when you're coming to market as the company, there must be some amount, an element of good corporate governance. So these are some of the things we started to work on, ensuring that persons understand the rules of the game, understand the Securities Act, understand the Companies Act, understand how they fit in, and how accessing equity capital for the supplier would grow their business, and also what are some of the benefits if I invest in this company? What are some of the governance structure that would be available for me? What is some of the confidence that I would need to know that the stock exchange is providing? You know, so one is building confidence in the market. Two is building an understanding about the market, on both sides. And so that was an investment we felt that was necessary. Because remember, we had an electronic trading platform already, which was tightly coupled to a settlement platform. So persons, from the standpoint of technology, we had set that base for seamless trading and settlement. Now is to make people understand what that means and also grow. Because as you know, our markets are small, and liquidity is always an issue, or a liquid market. And, you know, one of the reason for that is that with fewer securities on the market, persons buy and hold. They don't have anything else to invest in except, you know, fixed income securities, which we are saying you need to have a balance in your portfolio. So the idea was building that confidence in the market, building an understanding of the market, ensuring that persons knew how they could get redress if there are things that would happen on a market. And also from the standpoint of the company itself, one of the confidence building was demutualizing the exchange. So removing the ownership from the trading of the exchange. And so these are some of the things that we put in place in order to get the market going. So that was the first half.
Fascinating. And I mean, obviously, yes, you were quite early, as I seem to recall, in the demutualization movement relative to the rest of the world. And that definitely created a different dynamic in the market, didn't it?
It did, because what it did, you know, and it's not only our market, but many of small markets, people feel that it is incestuous. You know, people know what is happening. People are are timing the market. People are, going on with things that would not happen. Not to say that we were doing that, but the confidence is important, and demutualization created that level of confidence where you separated the regulatory affairs from the commercial. So there's no commingling. And the board was at that point very much engaged, totally engaged in the fact that this had to be done, so that no decision relating to listed companies came to the board, but came instead to a regulatory and market oversight committee, where the decisions on things relating to company and company's activity were final. So it gave people cause now for pause, to listen, to say, well, this is what governance look like. This is what governance should be. And then the confidence, it created now that confidence in the market, so that persons, even where they bought at an IPO and they didn't do any transaction, they decided, let us take a chance. And then what we found is that more young people started to crowd into the market. So the confidence went on, and as the market evolved, as technology evolved, what we tried to do was also keep a pace. Very important. So we know electronic trading, but then after that, you had the direct trading of securities, where online, one could trade online, and that created a different dynamic as well, because what it did was the demographics. When you look at now who started to invest in the market, you were pulling in younger persons to the market, because it was easy, it was convenient, it was, it became fun. So these are some of the things we did, and kept a pace with technology. That it was important. We kept a pace at all times with technology, whether it was cloud technology, whether we are talking about cybersecurity, whether we are talking about data privacy. You kept abreast so that you are not left behind, and while being a small market, you are still having all the trappings that was necessary to make a market successful.
Fascinating stuff. And as you say, I mean, you've been in electronic market now. Well, I think you were in electronic market either when you arrived or just soon after.
Just as I arrived, yes.
Yes. You've been through a series of different systems and vendors as you go along. It's a very interesting pathway, what you can learn and how those can be best suited to a small market.
Correct. That is correct. Because what you want to ensure is that as you look at your systems, they are fit for purpose. They must be fit for purpose. And one of those things is, while providing you with the necessary, trapping to ensure that you have like the tightly coupled agreement, you do have your market watch, you have all of those. What you also want to ensure is that because you're a small market, you have a great product, but you also have an affordable product, and you have vendors that will work with you in order to ensure that in the event you need customization, you need issues like that. Right now we have the NASDAQ trading engine. You are able to get it in order to seamlessly integrate with other companies or other programs. Yeah.
Yes, it's very interesting. And of course, one of the great advantages to NASDAQ is the fact they simply have so many installations worldwide. They're used to customizing 120 different countries or something worldwide. It's quite an incredible track record. So tell me a little bit more about the demutualization per se, because you demutualized and then you listed on your own exchange.
That is correct. So we demutualize, and as I'm going to underscore again, it is separating the regulatory functions from the commercial function. It is given because initially what was given to a person who invested in the exchange was what was called a seat, and that seat had two prongs. It allowed them to trade on the exchange, and it allowed them ownership. So in that seed, it had two functions. When we demutualized, what we did was to offer those persons with a seat permanent membership, and also monetized that seat into shares. After we did that, because it is transferring from what is called a mutual company to a public company. And so everyone now, those original owners had shares. And then we decided, look, if we are to talk about the advantages of this market, if we also need to grow, we also needed capital. And the initial thing that we did was we went for preference shares. And the market was very receptive to this because at this point, they understood the fact that we were serious about growth. We were serious about engaging. We were serious about having them get advantage of this platform. So that was the first thing. And then eventually, as you know, with the demutualization process, you can list on your own exchange. And so if we did a preference and we listed, but then after we offered the ordinary shares to the market, offered 25% of the ordinary shares were offered to the market, and it was oversubscribed. So the company, the Jamaica Stock Exchange, is listed on its own exchange. It is regulated by the Regulatory Market Oversight Committee. It is also regulated by the Financial Services Commission. So these goes to show how well the company is regulated.
It's a fabulous story, really, really exciting. And I mean, I don't want to delve into in-depth detail, but how has your shareholding structure evolved over time? Did brokers do a lot of selling of their stock? Are they still holders? Have you had other major investors or the public come into a greater percentage overall?
It is good that you asked that. And obviously very perceptive. You had brokers that sold everything, and you had some that sold and held back a part. And so the mix now is that you have a much more, I think it probably is in the region of over 50% that is owned in the public, in the public domain. So yes, that shift has taken place. Brokers have sold, some have held, some have bought, and have had, even when, because there is a level at which any one broker cannot hold more than X amount of shares. And might have bought and sold back in the public domain. So it has been what I call a normal trading security, and there is no restriction to whether you can buy and sell, except that your percentage holding should not be more than X percent.
Oh, so interesting. So what is if you can recall, what is the percentage holding limit then for the exchange?
I think it is 10%.
Right.
I think it's 10%, yes.
Okay, so it's quite liberal even compared to some of the more restrictive regimes that are 5%. But the idea is obviously to keep the company public and therefore maintain it for the common good, which is understandable.
Correct. That is correct.
Very understandable. So I mean, one of the things that fascinates me, and we're going to get onto this more in a moment, though, is to understand better the Jamaica's position in the world, because I think probably, and this is no bad thing, when we think about Jamaica, we instantly tend to recognize the beauty, the beaches, the wonderful holiday resorts, and some very, very beautiful, expensive resorts as well. And we also think, obviously, of athletic achievements. I mean, fabulous sprinters, incredible cricketers, and so on. Tell me a little bit, though, about the actual Jamaican economy, because not a lot of people realize just how significant. I mean, first of all, it's a population of several million people, and it's also quite a significant economy in its own right.
Yes, so you did not mention music, but I have to put
Good
that
point.
in.
Yeah, thank you for correcting me. That's very, very good point. How could I manage to omit music? That's a terrible omission.
Yes.
Carry on, Marlene.
But definitely in respect to our financial sector, as you know, we spent quite a few years ensuring that we shored up our economy in terms of debt to GDP, in terms of the employment rate, in terms of just how you facilitate and incubate businesses, whether they are small or medium-sized businesses. So overall, our impact has been good and has been studied. So when we talk about the financial sector, coming from a case where our debt to GDP was so high. Now, what we have shown is how with discipline, how with structure, how with the working between the government and the private sector, we were able to pull down those indicators, and as a result, get from the IMF, actually, wean yourself in a sense from the International Monetary Fund, except for the standby agreements, etc. So we have been functioning well, and the commitment has been even until Melissa, that's Hurricane Melissa, to reduce even more. At this point in time, you understand that there would be some amount of pause. And when I say pause, not that effort would not still be made, but there would be some significant impact on that in that arena. But definitely, the Jamaica government, the Jamaican economy has been doing quite well over a few years. I just want to say too that, as you know, the stock market reflects that. And in 2015 and 2018, based on how our companies were performing, we were the best performing exchange in the world, ranked out of, I think, 94, 95 companies, exchanges. We ranked in 2015 and 2018 as the best performing exchanges in the world.
Yes, that record was quite incredible when you were best performing for so many years. And it's also, if I may say so, the particularly interesting part about that was that your exchange has a pretty broad base of listings. It's not as if it was a particularly tech-centric exchange at a time when we have guests who come on for whole shows and talk about nothing other than investing in technology.
No, it was broad-based. So while it is that in, say, 2000, the concentration was on banking and finance stocks, what you found that over the period, we evolved, quite a lot in terms of manufacturing, in terms of technology company, in terms, entertainment. So, it was broad-based. And the look was really on the main market. But let me explain something. I think it is necessary. While one evolves, while an exchange evolves, an exchange, and Jamaica did that right, is to look at what is the market do I serve? What market do I serve? And most of the companies, in comparison to the more developed countries, is the small and medium-sized companies. And what we did in 2009, which has been a pilot for many countries now in the world. And when I'm saying in the world, I mean in the world, not only in our Caribbean, is the junior market that we created in 2009. And again, it goes to show what can be done when government, private sector meet to see how they are going to fulfill a need. And the junior market was born in order to do just that. Encourage small and medium-sized companies to access equity capital on the market, but with a difference. So we looked at AIM, we looked at TSX, and we said, look, these are good, these are catering for venture companies. However, it still did not quite meet what we wanted to achieve. And that is what we talk about when we talk about innovation. It's going the extra mile to see what will work. And so what we did was provide these companies with tax holiday, but tax holiday with a difference. It is the only tax holiday that you're going to get, where we did not have a clawback. Meaning that if you are not listed on the market, if you are not performing, if your governance is not good, we could say that company is delisted and would have to pay back all the taxes that was foregone. And so that market, along with the main market, we now have in the region, I think, of 145, 150 securities. So yes, it is the fact that we have become so broad-based, and companies anticipate almost as soon as they start business, to get it right in terms of corporate governance, in terms of their financial statements, because they want, as a part of the capital mix, to list on the Jamaica Stock Exchange.
And I think that's a very, very well made point, because what you're saying is, you mentioned it directly, the venture-based exchanges. And actually that's very important, because there is still a tendency to overly financialize the listing of SME exchanges very early in their stage of development. Whereas what you really need, which you developed within Jamaica, was the opportunity to have a better core Main Street meets Wall Street, for want of a better term, function, which helps those companies develop and also helps them brand in the community, which I think is a very key part of having a local stock exchange that supports. And thirdly, you hit the nail on the head. Government has to be part of the discussion. It's not a question of throwing money at the problem. It's not a question of the entire government stopping from paving the roads and doing all sorts of important vital functions like providing health, etc. But government has to be assisting the stock market as a partner, and therefore the overall marketplace, to make sure that the ecosystem really develops.
That is correct. And you said something, Patrick, about the investors investing. None of the securities that have been listed on the junior market, all of them have been oversubscribed. What does that tell you? It tells you something. It says to you that as investors, we also want to be a part of that success. We want to push these companies to success. We know that we're also going to get, because we're not altruistic only, we know that we're going to get something in return. And we are confident that the regulatory trapping, all of that will be there to guide these companies to do good, to grow, and to succeed.
Those are very, very powerful words altogether. And we're going to go to our customary middle break with a short video in just a second. But I want to ask you one question, because you gave us a tantalizing fact. When you arrived, or around the time you arrived at the Jamaica Stock Exchange, you said there were about 50,000 investors. Do you have an indication of how many investors there are in the Jamaica Stock Exchange these days?
360,000 investors in the Jamaica Stock Exchange. And I'd love that number to be more than that. But we do have that. And one of the things that we want to ensure is not only do they invest when it comes to an IPO, but they become active investors. So that those are some of the fundamentals that we need to ensure that happen in the growth and development of the capital markets.
That is a phenomenal statistic. I mean, first of all, you've got wonderful penetration because you're 360,000 people. You're well through 10% of the overall population of Jamaica. But more significantly as well, you've taken that and over the course of a quarter of a century, grown it by 6 times and more. That is an incredible number. I'm going to allow you to bask in the glory of that for a second while we go to our short video, give you a brief rest. Ladies and gentlemen, there's just under 3 million people in Jamaica. A city in China which has half that population is Yiwu. Now, they have had a very interesting year as a result of what's been going on in the world of Trump's tariffs. And here is our weekly Big World video. Meanwhile, in Big World, key Chinese export hub, Yiwu, home to a vast array of products, particularly trinkets, has weathered the Trump tariff storm with gusto. According to the South China Morning Post, the city's imports and exports surpassed 700 billion yuan, that's $99 billion in the first 10 months of 2025, a year-on-year increase of 25.2%, and more than the total increase recorded for the whole of the previous year, according to local customs data. For more in Big World, like or follow. With that fantastic good news story that just shows you still can do world trade in this day and age, despite what might be happening amongst some of the larger governments of this world. Worth also looking at our book of the week, ladies and gentlemen. This week's a very technical one. One of our subscribers, a contributor to this, Joseph Itkin, along with Yulia Emelianova, Dmitry Degtyarenko, and Anna Maria Lukina. That's quite a mouthful for this time of the morning. I need more coffee. The book itself, Introduction to AI Testing, a guide to ISTQB CTAI certification, might not be everybody's cup of tea, ladies and gentlemen, but let me tell you, this is absolutely vital stuff. In fact, actually, Exact Pro, which is Yosef's company, just signed a deal last week with one of our own Exchange Invest sponsors, Connemara EP3, in order to promulgate the testing of systems. And in this day and age, no matter how you're defining your code, the most important thing is to make sure that you are testing it. When you're dealing with your large language models, you've certainly got to be testing those, because otherwise, who knows what sort of shadowy ghosting can take place in the background if you're not careful. Our book of the week is, of course, unleashed in our weekend Exchange Invest newsletter, which you can read entirely free Monday through Friday. That's the hard yakka on the world of exchanges. You can subscribe to both and get a 7-day free trial today at exchangeinvest.com. Back to our fascinating discussion today. We're talking to Kingston, Jamaica, in this wonderful recorded show with Marlene Street Forrest, who was for 25 years the driving force in management amongst an incredible team of the Jamaica Stock Exchange. We've already heard those incredible numbers to go from 50,000 investors to at least 360,000 and more, which of course makes up for significantly greater than 10% of the population, getting somewhere about an eighth of the population investing, a population of 2.93 million, if I remember correctly, roughly the Jamaican statistic. Marlene, tell me something. I'm very interested in moving the conversation. You've talked a bit about the economy. We talked earlier, you correctly corrected me for how could I possibly manage to lose the legacy of Bob Marley and a zillion other great musicians, but also, of course, that great sporting legacy of Jamaica. Diasporas. Obviously, I'm Irish. By the time you watch this, we'll have just had St. Mea's Day, St. Patrick's Day on March the 17th, a week before you're getting to watch this for the first time, ladies and gentlemen. The Jamaican diaspora, very significant in the world and in the world economy, and presumably also to Jamaica itself.
Definitely. You can see even as we had the Melissa, how the diaspora rallied around Jamaica. I want to make that point even before talking about the financial aspect of, the capital market. And so what we have done, I spoke earlier about online trading. And the reason why we created the online trading platform was to ensure that the diaspora was able to take advantage of the trading and the benefits of stocks on the Jamaica Stock Exchange. And from time to time, what we have done, we have engaged, we go to them or they come to us and we engage in just what are the opportunities that are available for persons who want to send back their money, because many, as you know, you are Irish, the money's come back to the country, but not only send it back to look about the immediate needs of families, but what they can get for themselves in terms of investing in the securities and passively investing in securities in Jamaica. So we have been courting our diasporans to do just that. In June, there will be, I think it is June, a diaspora conference that they have each 2 years. And again, the Jamaica Stock Exchange will play, although I'm not there, but I know that they will play an active role in ensuring the information passes and also to show the relative ease in which the diasporans can benefit from investing in the stock exchange, either again as an investor or again in listing their companies, because there is no restriction. And I want to underscore that, because sometimes people feel that there is a restriction in persons owning stocks on the exchange, persons external to Jamaica. There is none. Persons can own stocks on the exchange, persons can trade on the exchange, and persons who are out of Jamaica can also list their securities on the Jamaica Stock Exchange.
That's a very, very important point. And if I may just ask you, though, if I'm correct in thinking there are issues with, I mean, there's some paperwork or whatever on the Jamaican currency, because the Jamaican dollar is a little bit like the Bahamian dollar, relatively restricted, which goes back 50, 60 years in order to try and better regulate the economy.
Okay, so there is not a restriction in our currency.
Okay.
Yes, it is free float. There's no restriction in our currency. It takes it changes daily, depending on supply and demand. The central bank would monitor, but there's no currency restriction.
So I stand corrected, and thank you for clarifying that point, because I'm obviously too used to for example, the Bahamian dollar, which can be very easy to get into Bahamian dollars, but sometimes can be a little bit of a stress to try and get out of on occasion, depending on what transactions you've been doing. You have to always remember your paperwork. So that's very interesting. So the currency is free floating.
Yes.
I mean, the exchange is totally open. I keep saying I've been so used to it for the course of 25 years that it seems like you identify with the exchange, and the exchange, l'état c'est moi, la bourse c'est Marlene. But the Jamaica Stock Exchange has no restrictions then for outside investors, which is obviously wonderful for the diaspora and other citizens.
That is correct. No restrictions to invest in the stock exchange, and there's no currency restriction. So what better you have? It's good. It's good. It's just for them to understand, open those accounts with the various brokers, because as you know, you don't go directly to an exchange to open an account. So you go through brokers, and going through brokers, you can do that electronically, because the online trading platform allows for you to do that. Upload your document, open your cash account, so that securities, you do your trading yourself, and securities flow based on the algorithm of the platform. Your price and quantity, etc.
Those are great points, excellent points altogether. Marlene, I mean, we've been having a fascinating discussion. We've touched upon the diaspora. We've talked about the Jamaican economy. We've looked at the history of the exchange and the many dynamic things you did with it. I fear, however, for today's conversation, we're running out of time, although I would love you to come back and chat more about markets. I think it'd be absolutely fascinating. So therefore, I'm going to ask you our regular question we ask at this point in time. Marlene Street Forrest, where do you think the capital market revolution goes next?
Well, the capital market revolution must go green. And it is a matter of ensuring that you take care of the environment and the environment will take care of you. So there are trillions of dollars in respect to social and green products. And I think we have to look at those, we have to court those while we continue to ensure that technology is important and security of market is important. We now have to look at relevance of market to our region. And one of the things is environment. And we have to ensure that we build the products, we build the services around that. Social, ESG, social products, environmentally friendly products, so that we can be more sustainable. The markets are tending to be more introspective now than otherwise. And so we have to look at our own region, our own countries, and say, what is it that we need in order to be sustainable? If there are shocks, because the markets are uncertain now and countries are, you spoke about it earlier in the show. If there are shocks, we can be resilient. And this is something that we need now to look at. And we need to look at regional integration, however it looks, because it does not have to look one way, but it must be fit for purpose. And we have to look at regional integration. We also have to look at how do you commoditize. So now we don't have a commodities market in the region. And I think the time has come for us to look at things like that.
Well, that was a phenomenal answer. What can I say, Marlene? It has been a joy to have you on the show. We have discussed topics from the micro lens of Jamaica, pulsating Caribbean economy of 3 million people, all the way through the diaspora across the world, through the technology of drives markets and the reforms you can make, particularly for smaller markets to make them dynamic. And you end with a rousing discussion of how environmental products are key. We want to look at things like food security. We want to look at the way commodities markets can be better organized and better functioning. I think those are all absolutely incredible topics, and I absolutely agree with you wholeheartedly in every possible way. It has been a joy, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope it's not going to be the last time to welcome Marlene Street Forrest, a living legend who retired recently from the Jamaican Stock Exchange after 25 years and more leading that organization. We will be back after the Easter holidays, so stay tuned for our next show. In the meantime, I wish you all, because we are not going to be around next week because we will be preparing for Holy Week, so we wish you all a very, very happy Easter, whatever you may be celebrating over the course of the next couple of months, couple of weeks anywhere in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Patrick L. Young. I want to say a huge thank you to my fabulous team today, to AJ, to Herminia and Janella, who have been backing up our powerful woman speaker on this particular IPO-VID, Marlene Street Forrest. Thank you for watching. If you need a new market built, get in touch. And of course, I wish you all, until we meet again, a good week, a good fortnight in life and markets.